Good morning, good afternoon to everyone that has joined. I think we still have a few people coming in, so we might just give it sort of 10, 20 seconds. Perfect. Okay, so we'll kick off. Look, thanks for dialing in today, wherever you're dialing in from. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Matt. I'm from RoomPriceGenie, and I'm pleased to be joined by Matthias from Nuvho, here to talk all things booking behaviours, looking at obviously past, present, and to garner Matt's amazing thoughts about potentially where the booking journey might go into the future. So as I mentioned, myself, I'm the commercial director here at RoomPriceGenie. I've been in and around the hotel space now for just over 20 years. I've come from hotels in operations and revenue. Here at RoomPriceGenie, we work with around 4,000 properties to power their pricing from an automated revenue management perspective. So as I said, pleased to be joined by Matthias at Nuvho. Matthias, I'll hand over to you to do a bit of an intro.
Yeah, thank you. Glad to be here as well, Matt. Thank you very much for the invite. So I'm the co-founder of Nuvho. Nuvho, we do provide sales, marketing, as well as revenue management outsourcing capabilities for hotels. We work with about 200 plus hotels across Australia and the UK. So about 18 months ago, we launched an office in the UK to essentially service the UK as well as continental Europe with our business model. So we provide outsourced services. So if somebody needs a sales resource, a marketing resource, or a revenue management person, we essentially the company that people speak to provide these services. 30 years experience. That makes me feel old, but yeah, I started in the industry when I was 16, and now I'm 46, so there you go. I tick that box. 30 years.
Cool. Thanks for the intro. Look, just to set up a bit of an agenda for everyone, obviously you guys are here to sort of learn more about the booking funnel, past, present, and future. What we want to do towards the end is also share some tips around what you guys could potentially do today to start thinking about and preparing for what that future booking journey could look like. We're also going to run a Q&A. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll address them at the end. All in all, we should be done within sort of 45 minutes. So we'll try and make sure that we leave enough time at the end to address any of those questions. So without further ado, Matt, let's kick into it, I think. So I think probably if we think about the past, let's start there. So think back 10, 15, 20, 30 years in our case. What did that sort of typical hotel booking journey look like for most guests?
Yellow pages, essentially travel agents, walking into the hotel and, looking at the rack rate and saying it's $400 and that's only one price. So it was essentially just pen and paper, really. I remember being a young receptionist and tracing lines, and the lines were all the rooms with every day. Ultimately, we didn't have a PMS or property management system on these days. I remember the first opera screen that I've seen. It was called Macros Fidelio, with some blue and red colors. And the way that people were finding hotels, it was often word of mouth, yellow pages, travel agents, and it was pretty much all offline. The internet, Google is not even 30 years old. I started my career before Google essentially came into the mix in 1998. And from there, ultimately, Google rate of adoption only really started in the early 2000s when people really started engaging with the search as we know it now. And for the past 18 months, as we know, ChatGPT or the likes like Claude or Gemini sort of came through as well to enable different ways to search and to shop for hotels. So there's been quite an expansion there. I think if we go further now, and if we sort of start looking at the current behavior, I think if you can just go into the few slides. the way that people search, and I'm talking about the last 10 years. I'm talking about until early 2025, and even now, is still happening. People use search engine. Google got 94% market share in a search funnel in Western countries. People think that ChatGPT is disrupting Google. You could argue that's the case. But when I look at the financial results of the last year from Google, their search revenue and profits went up 15%. That's hardly the result of a company that gets disrupted. If anything, is the result of a company that's getting market share. So we're going to talk about the ChatGPT a little bit later on, but ultimately for the past 10 years or 10, 15 years, people will go on Google, type in hotels anywhere in the world, and then they will be faced with ultimately results which were often OTAs, Booking.com, Expedia, Travelocity, whatever it was. People will then be presented with a list of hotels. Call it the Westfield for hotels, essentially. You're walking into Booking.com, you got a choice of different options. Booking.com and the likes are convenient for consumers. This is why the customer is using them a lot and start their search. So you've got Focusrite in 2017 went to ask multiple people in different countries, how do you search for hotels? How do you shop for hotels? And most of the people, 70% of us, ultimately were saying we shop on an OTA. The same amount were saying we also shop on meta-search. Now, if you don't know what meta-search is Trivago. Is Google business listing. When you type the name of the hotel and you get a price comparison on the right-hand side of the screen. So what that means is that people go on Google, type in hotels in Dublin, for example, a list of results comes up, you filter, you search, you compare, and you come up with a list of maybe 2 or 3 properties that is interesting. Then you will go and talk to your companion, the travel companion. For me, that would be my wife. And I will say, this one's got this one's got that, this one's got that. And she will say, let's book this one. And then I will go back to Google because I saw the Trivago ads on TV telling me that I can get a better price. And they're still happening. I was watching TV yesterday and you will still at the Trivago ads educating the consumer to go to look for a better price for the same room in the same hotel. And therefore, the consumer behavior that you've got at the moment in searching hotels for the masses are happening in that way. Google, Booking.com or Expedia, Trivago or Google in terms of pricing comparison. The hotel website comes in the mix. The hotel website is when somebody types in the name of the hotels on Google, what you want is to dominate that page through advertising and essentially through organic listing and making sure that you dominate that page and it's not dominated by OTAs that will then win back that bookings where it could actually come direct. So you were going to ask that?
No, I was just going to say it's like a lot has changed in a really short space of time.
Yes.
If we go from essentially that walk-in bar rate type behavior, ringing up on the phone, etc., probably faxes. I mean, I remember the first hotel I was at that connected to SiteMinder as the first channel manager. That was a massive eye-opener, and that actually wasn't that long ago. And so I think even from a guest booking behavior, if I think back to then, rack rate where rates were always the same, they were static. Then we moved to dynamic. There's all that revenue management space as well that does change a little bit that guest behavior part as well. You've sort of alluded to it, and like in talking about obviously the ChatGPTs, which we'll cover off in a bit more, Google, OTAs. Sort of at what point in your mind do you think that traditional funnel of walking in, getting yellow pages, those sorts of things, at what point did it really start to break apart and change to what we see today?
Actually, I don't think it broke apart. I don't think our consumer behavior changed. I think the medium that we use to provide that booking behavior has changed. So yellow pages were replaced by the OTAs. Ultimately, instead of having a physical paper book, you now just can go on Booking.com and have all the listing of hotels and be able to compare them in the same way you would have done with yellow pages. It's just the medium has been replaced. You can still walk into a hotel and basically ask for a room and get the rate of the day. That doesn't change. It's more the way that the medium and the technology that we've got available to us has changed the way we use search, the way that we actually book hotels, and the way that we research hotels, more importantly, because what changed fundamentally is that everything became more transparent. pricing became more transparent and available. Reviews, is that a good hotel or is that not a good hotel? Reviews completely changed the game when it comes to guest experience. You can now being informed about whether a hotel is really, really good and, will deliver the guest experience that they're advertising on photos. Now you've got social proof, you've got multiple people that will tell you actually those photos are actually misleading. That hotel is not great. And so that became more important into the search funnel. Another behavior that actually started to change as well is that from a decision making in terms of bookings, the payment option has become more prevalent in terms of decision making. So in other words, if you book a flight and if you book your accommodation and you want to book experiences, often you need to wait for your next paycheck because you've got to pay rent, you've got to pay for food, you've got to pay your bills. So therefore, you probably got on that month's availability or funds for only your flights, and then you need to wait for next month to actually book the accommodation, perhaps. Now these days, with pay on installment method of payment like Afterpay and the likes, you are able to actually commit to that. And the younger generation, 50% of younger generation, say probably 18 to 35, are using those method of payments to actually make purchases. And so if you've got a booking engine, for example, or a website that does not allow to transact into Google Pay, Afterpay, Apple Pay, and the likes, you probably will lose that booking back to an OTA that allows that consumer to pay in a preferred manner. So those are the behavior that sort of change, and often it is linked to the convenience. It is linked to the consumer having more knowledge and power over their choices. And generally, what we see is that if you've got platforms or medium that allows that convenience to be enhanced and that power ultimately to be put back into the hand of the consumer, that rate of adoption towards those platforms will generally be higher. And you can see it in ChatGPT, you can see it in those. Whether or not they win the game, nobody knows. I mean, you've got about 5, 6, maybe 7 different AI search engine platforms these days, and Google is one of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think moving forward to sort of that current state of play, you shared just a short while ago a little bit around obviously how guests are finding hotels. So you had a slide there that mentioned the 55% of properties are using search engines, 53% using travel agencies. If we shift from sort of that search part into then the actual booking side of things, you've got some really interesting numbers that you've shared with me actually. So maybe you want to talk around these a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the search starts on an OTA will go into Meta, which is a price comparison, which went back often to an OTA. So if you look at Trivago, the result that you will see when you compare your prices will be Booking.com, Expedia. So the consumer initiated their search on Booking.com, Expedia to compare the hotels. They now choose one or two. They now look for the pricing on Meta, but that could go direct to the website, or that could actually go back to Booking.com. If I take that slide, for example, if I move that slide to this one, this is data from SiteMinder, which has thousands of properties across the world. The top booking source is still Booking.com, Expedia, and the third will be the hotel website. So that's generally ultimately where the consumer will initiate search and then book. But then you've got also the type of customer. Is that leisure or is that business? Now, if it's business these days, pre-COVID, you will have the GDS, okay? And you will have travel management company, let's say booking for IBM. And you will need to call the travel agent, and the travel agent will make the booking in a contracted hotel or the hotel that were contracted by IBM through an RFP process. What happened these days or post-COVID is that during COVID, you had a lot of travel agents that were made redundant, and you had all those travel management companies investing in technology, apps, ultimately, that will feed from the GDS, that will feed from consortia program, and that will feed from OTAs to show the booker, the traveler, and to allow them to book where they wanted to book based on the budget. So what was interesting is when you look at the stats of the GDS, for example, in terms of booking behavior, pre-COVID, 70% of bookings on the GDS were on contracted rates. Post-COVID, 70% are on non-qualified rates, non-contracted rates. So in other words, the consumer now has an app and is able to book based on where they want to stay, where perhaps they're going to meet friends after meetings, etc., and will choose the hotel that is not necessarily the hotel that was contracted by the company. This is what it's essentially saying. So booking behavior can change based on the type of travel, the type of traveler, business versus leisure. It can also change based on the complexity of a booking. Now, if you book one flight, one destination, one flight, one hotel, that's really easy to book for anybody. But if you're going to book an itinerary going around Europe, where you're going into 4 or 5 countries, and you need to book a long-haul flights, and you need to book 4 domestic flights, 5 different hotels, and then activities around points of interest, that becomes a lot more complicated. And until now, travel agents dominated this via wholesalers. What I think AI is going to change and is going to take that complexity away. You're going to be, and like many people do, they go on ChatGPT and they say, find me hotels on those points of interest. Can you help me to build an itinerary, etc. The Booking.com and Expedia call that the connected trip, where essentially you can book multiple travel items in one go, flights, accommodation, and activities. Once this itinerary is being done, you could press book it, and then you could have this AI going and book everything, and you got within 10 minutes, you've got all those confirmation into your inbox and calendar and into your Apple Wallet for all your boarding pass and the likes. So this is where we are going essentially. Is what I'm suggesting essentially is that the travel agent or certain travel agents or type of travel agents will be replaced by AI in a sense of AI removing the complexity and giving back the power and the convenience for a consumer to book their own travel without having to go and talk to somebody else and explain what they want to do. So that. And then this is one payment plan, the pay on installment, etc. payment method will come in, because if you book your whole Europe trip that's going to cost you $10,000, you're not going to be able to fork the money straight away into it unless you've got a lot of saving, which is not the case for many people. So the pay on installment payment method in that will become more prevalent as well.
Yeah, all good points. I think what's also interesting, and on your next slide, you sort of touch on this as well, but largely around, we've got obviously the different distribution channels that are available, but then you throw in an element of demographic, age bands, generations, and also that changes a lot as well. I mean, I look at my parents, they really struggle. I am their travel agent because they just don't want to deal with it. So yeah, I don't know if you want to sort of comment a little bit around, I guess, for the audience around current booking behaviors, around how we kind of have this segregation a little bit based on that demographic.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, if I look at my 16-year-old boy that spends 70% of his time on TikTok, if I look at his battery on his phone, 70% is used by TikTok. How do I know that? Is because one day he disappeared, his phone was dying. We didn't know where he was. And at the end I went and I said, why is your battery so dead all the time? And it was TikTok. If he could book on TikTok, if he consume his news on TikTok, he basically, so that's a generation thing. My mom is the same, 80 years old, and she would be able to potentially book flights and one accommodation, perhaps online, but that would be it, and she would need to be guided as well. And therefore, a travel agent in a sense of a physical travel agent, and this is why you still have flight center shops in shopping center. Why? Is because that's where the old people hang out during the week. They go and do their shopping every day, etc. And it's convenient to walk into flight center for my mom and say, I'm going to go to Australia, visit my grandchildren, but I need to go and do my shopping. When I come back, can you just show me an itinerary? So that means that this, for the moment, is going to stay put until that generation is basically taken over. Increasingly, what you have also is you've got DINKs, ultimate double income, no kids, and you've got a lot more people now these days that are choosing not to have children. And ultimately, they choose experience over that. So people think about people are loyal. they're not loyal to a brand, they're loyal to value for money. And a brand that gives value for money week in, week out will probably have more of that repeat business. But an independent hotel thinking that they can do loyalty cannot, because loyalty is the ability to provide multiple destinations to one customer based on where they're going to go next. And the customer is increasingly driven on the leisure part by new experiences. So you don't want to go back to the same hotel. You want to experience a new one, perhaps in the same destination, or you don't want to go back to the same destination. You want to experience another destination, and that's becoming more and more prevalent in the younger generation as well. And they will use mediums to get inspired, which will generally be social media, Instagram, obviously, TikTok, and the likes. They will be on a mobile device, and in the morning on the way to work, if they take the train or public transport, they will be on a mobile. They will be on their desktop doing 9 to 5 because they're at work, and then in the evening they'll be watching TV or whatever, Netflix with a tablet on a lap, and this is where they will continue their search as well. So you've got sort of trends in that way. Now, what's interesting is if we go back to a ChatGPT sort of scenario, and you can see that in terms of search versus book, the traffic on devices for tablets and mobile in terms of searching is basically higher, but in terms of booking, it seems that we feel more secure about booking on a desktop. It's probably because of security, it's probably, I don't know, but it seems that there's a lot more bookings being made on desktop than there is searches, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. I think we'll go to the next slide because you've got a really interesting heat map there, and I know that you've got some interesting insights. Also conscious of time, sort of to really want to get your thoughts out about the future because you've got some really interesting takes on this.
Definitely, and I just put that in because until 2025, until 3 months ago, really, that 2017 heat map. So this is actually showing eye tracking on users using Google. So if you old like me and you remember the 2014, what you will remember is that you did not have business listing on the right-hand side of the screen like that 2017 heat map showed. That was introduced by Google to be able to monetize another funnel or ad funnel, which is called Google Hotel Ads, the price comparisons for that hotel, where they could monetize clicks. In addition to having Google Ads, there was Google Hotel Ads. What's interesting now is that up until 3 months ago, that 2017 heat map was very, very similar. But obviously, ChatGPT came into the mix and Google had to react. And Google 3 months ago changed the way that you actually see the screen when you jump onto your search, onto a search on them. So you've got more of an AI mode that would sort of come on top. Business listing went from the right-hand side to the top as well with the reviews to give more space for that AI funnel and more real estate for sponsored search results as well. So Google is actually responding to what seemingly is a threat to them. I want to point out that Google is deeply, deeply embedded into all the devices. They own Android. So that means that they're embedded in anything that is not Apple. But they also provide all the search results for Apple users. So in other words, if you use a mobile, if you use a tablet, you are within the Google search funnel. Interestingly enough, Apple only a month ago said, we're not going to develop our own AI for Siri, we're going to start using Gemini. So in other words, what you have is you've got Google literally controlling the search funnel for all the mobile devices in the world, including Apple. So ChatGPT, where do they stand? They're an app on mobile. But they're highly embedded into the desktop Microsoft setup via Copilot. So it just seems that when I was saying that in the morning you search on mobile and then you on your desktop and then in the evening you're on tablet, it seems that you're moving from a Google environment to a ChatGPT environment via Copilot if you're using Microsoft, and you go back into the Google environment in the evening. So what that means is essentially the search funnel, not the booking funnel, could be dominated by Google still into the future, and ChatGPT will have a hard time sort of getting into that funnel. So perhaps ChatGPT, therefore, is just a fad. It's just, yes, rate of adoption when we were skyrocketed over the last 18 months because of novelty, but it's is that actually going to take over what's in our devices? It cannot.
Yeah, I think these are all a little bit. We'll have to wait and see who wins the race ultimately.
Definitely.
Look, I think for all intents and purpose, I think in terms of the current booking funnel, I think it's fairly clear around what that looks like at this moment in time. Guess, as you've said, the searching on Google, OTAs and meta search still a very big part of that. Decisions largely still driven by price and location ultimately, as the perceived value from bookers. And revenue management, I think, in many cases, particularly in the independent space, still remains quite a manual process. So I guess that then sort of ties into, the guest behavior itself that we've talked about. I'm keen to sort of move through to the future, just to sort of really tease those thoughts out. So we've talked a lot about, TikTok, demographics, GPT, Gemini, all these sorts of things. So I think, if there's a hotelier that's listening today that sort of wants to get your take on it, how do you think AI will change the way that guests search and choose hotels into the future?
He already had. He already has. Ultimately, a lot of bookers are using ChatGPT to help with their itinerary, especially going in locations that they don't know, or trying to book complex travel itineraries. So AI is already there. You're already using it on a daily basis via Google. Gemini, ultimately, for those who don't know, is the AI of Google. You've got ChatGPT. You've got another one that was created by two people that were at OpenAI before, called Claude. So it's a company called Anthropic. And what was interesting about Anthropic is that the owners of Anthropic released a white paper about 2 weeks ago, saying that they already highlighted that Claude, in a testing environment, was trying to deceive the human. So in other words, the research results that were returned were actually deceiving. I don't know if he killed his own tool by saying this, but the reality is actually shows that from an AI perspective, we need to really understand and break down what AI is. Okay? AI is artificial intelligence. All right? It's intelligence. Now, you've got different phases of AI. At the moment, we are into what is called narrow AI, like the generative AI. We're trying to move, and is moving, into agentic AI, which is essentially where AI starts thinking for itself and making more connection and return. Essentially, the AI becomes self-aware, or more self-aware. This is when we're going to start putting that AI into robots like Optimus with Tesla, for example. So at the moment, if you look at ChatGPT, it's a generative AI. Instead of putting keywords, you put prompts, and you're being returned a result that probably is more, with a response, as opposed to you having to find it through search result. It's essentially giving you the answer. Now, is that answer the right answer? We don't know. Are we making our next generation dumber by giving them instant gratification with the results straight away, without them having to critically think whether that's correct or not? Well, this guy from Claude is saying that the AI is deceiving as well. So is that answer the correct one? Now, in the travel environment, that's a question for later on. I can't answer those questions. I've got
a crystal ball.
I've got a circle of competence, and that's above. But what I can do is I can make connections. What I can see is I can see what happened into the future, what's happening now, and how the behavior changes. And I've got test subject in my home. I've got a 16-year-old, I've got a 10-year-old, I've got my wife, and I've got myself, and I've got friends as well. And I can observe the way that they're actually changing their behavior. Now, what's interesting is that ChatGPT, as of this month, has gone into a beta for marketing ads. So in other words, they're using the Google model. All right. Now, if I go back in history, in 2017 or 2016, Google launched Book on Google. So in other words, you could actually complete your booking, your search booking on Google with paying with Google Pay, for example. At this point in time, his two biggest clients across all categories, which are Booking.com and Expedia, went to Google and said, hey, mate, what are you doing? You're actually getting into our turf here when we're actually your biggest clients. We're not going to have to spend any more money. Google canned it. Google took Book on Google and it disappeared. Now, from a ChatGPT perspective that's trying to monetize search, do you think that they're going to remove the two biggest advertisers in the world and not letting them pay for ads? No, they are. And so therefore the search is going to become more the shopping, the researching. But from a booking perspective, the search results are still going to be Booking.com, Expedia, and other OTAs that are allowing ChatGPT to monetize their search. That's my view. And therefore, I do think that the guest pass to booking is not necessarily going to change necessarily in terms of the consumer still searching on OTAs, etc. What I think is going to change is you'll be feeding a prompt to ChatGPT or Gemini via voice or in natural language.
Yep.
That prompt will be fed directly into Booking.com. So let's say I'm looking to go to Sydney next week. Can you find me a hotel in Potts Point with a view and a well-equipped gym? And essentially the AI or the search results that are going to come through via Booking.com or Expedia is going to be smarter. And I was at a conference, Booking.com conference at the end of last year, and they call it smart filtering, where based on that prompt, the system or algorithm will start searching reviews, will start searching content, will start searching pictures and the likes to return a subset of hotels that better match that prompt. So instead of having a larger list of hotels, you're going to have a narrow list of hotels that match specifically that search from that customer and their want and needs, as opposed to the consumer having to do it themselves through filters, etc. What that means ultimately is going to become more personalized. And because it's going to become more personalized, you've got some hotels that are going to drop off the list. So how can you be within that list? How can you be within that list is updating your content. It's free. You can go on all those extranets. You can go on all different website platform, etc., that you advertise your hotel onto, and update content. Tick boxes. If you've got air conditioning but it's not ticked and a consumer search for air conditioning, you will not come up in the search. As simple as that. So those tick boxes, the content on the OTAs, tagging pictures with keywords, here is my well-equipped gym. So you've got a picture and you've got a tag. All those things are going to be more important to be found from an AI perspective because AI eats structured content for breakfast. It feeds on structured content. The second thing, I think, when you actually look at the way that the consumer is going to behave, I think more searches are going to originate from social media. So these days you can go on Instagram and book your hairdresser directly from Instagram. There could be a time now where you actually got a lot more of those OTAs and group of hotels like Accor connected to ChatGPT recently, but you've got Booking.com connected, deep connected to TikTok and started receiving booking directly from TikTok. Essentially where the consumer will be where they consume content and news, which format sound will be TikTok, for example, and he will be able to purchase his items directly from TikTok all the way through, on his mobile devices. So the complexity of going from one side to another may be that all those social media platform with search platform, with booking platform, like Booking.com, Expedia, and the likes will be deeply embedded to actually have that seamless booking journey from the aspirational part all the way to the booking part. Now, how the direct booking engine comes into the mix, how the website, direct website comes into the mix, I think that's going to be deeply reduced. I think when you start thinking about a website which is these days static, I think the websites for different users are going to morph into different websites, if that makes sense. That you've got a website developer like Divi and the likes that's already started this way based on where the user come from, etc.
That talks to that personalization part.
Definitely. And I think therefore for me, the way I think about how can I actually lower my cost of acquisition. So therefore wanting to get more direct bookings when that funnel is going to be dominated by OTAs and by the search funnel and perhaps social. And Booking.com shared stats that now they're getting more traffic via social than they are via Google. And the lack of ChatGPT and those platforms increased 400% month on month into the traffic to their site. they started receiving booking directly from TikToks and the like. So what you can see is they're going to embed this. And with social media, where we've got all our wants and needs, and where we cry and we laugh and we share data, etc., how personalized can you be then? You basically know everything about that single user. But this brings me to, you've got that completely integrated booking funnel, I suppose, or search and booking funnel, and then it's broken. When a hotelier receives the booking, often we don't receive the email address of the guest, we don't receive from the OTAs, we don't receive the mobile number, etc. Now, guess what? When the booking goes into the PMS, if I'm Mr. Smith that stayed 100 times before, and here I'm Mr. Smith, I'm the same Mr. Smith, but I decided to book on booking.com for whatever reason, when the booking is delivered into the PMS, you've got what is called a mix and merge and match process, match and merge, whereby the system will say first name, last name, mobile number, email address, is that the same? So yeah, is the same. So we can actually match this Mr. Smith to the Mr. Smith that stayed 100 times with us before. But the OTAs are not providing us that information, the email address, etc. And so what happens is that Mr. Smith that experienced a great experience from his social platform all the way to a booking, all seamless with no friction. When he comes and check in at the property, because we weren't provided all the same information, Mr. Smith that stayed 100 times with us is welcome like Mr. Smith that just booked with us for the first time.
Yeah.
And we've got So there is a disconnect there.
I was going to say, I think this part around tech stack in particular,
yes.
I'm conscious of time as well. We might just jump to some of those sort of key takeaways, but I think largely the key takeaways are different to what they would have been even 10, 15 years back, and largely all around tech and those sorts of things. And you and I spoke a lot about these things around how can hotels arm themselves now to prepare for what the future may hold. And again, I mean, if we had a crystal ball, then that's the $1 million question answered. But I think the first one here, sort of thinking about the digital visibility through structured content. Maybe you want to elaborate really quickly, 20 seconds.
Is content, structured content. So ChatGPT will actually read content on all those websites. I mean, essentially, and basically return a response that with results that's going to better match that prompt. And essentially, it's all about having content, structured content. So you need to think about SEO, so search engine optimization, but for AI. So in other words, these keywords is, if you had never done SEO, we started working with a company called Studio Oak. They're in Australia, they're in the UK, they're the best. They don't do digital, they just do SEO. And we started working with them 6 months ago, and they basically structured our website in a certain way. They structured our content in a certain way. They gave us the ability to understand what is authority when it comes to search. A website that is deeply connected with more websites that have more authority means that your website has more authority. Your website is more likely to come up into searches. So the deep linking, and therefore that brings the marketing part of it, which is if you do not have partnerships, if you do not invest in social, if you do not invest in looking after your website, if you do not invest in the latest technology, I'm not talking about the cheapest, because that's what hoteliers tend to do. They want a deal, they want the cheapest technology. Well, if you buy the cheapest technology, that provider cannot invest into the future because they're the cheapest, their margins are lower. You need to invest into the best technology. The one that are thinking ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think that leads into seeking out sort of those best-in-class solutions that we've got as point 3 here on the slides. It's not just about having a tech stack, it's about having the right tech stack.
The right tech stack, the one that will deeply embed with Google. I mean, Google is changing their framework pretty much yearly at the moment, and therefore the APIs are changing. Now, if you've got a booking engine that's got an API from 5 years ago, we in the AI world at the moment. That means that 1 year is like 7 years. We're moving in dog years in terms of technology development. And therefore, you need to work with companies that are thinking in dog years. So If you are a hotelier and you are not willing to change your tech stack and you're still okay with the tech stack you were using 5 or 10 years ago, you will lose that game. It's very simple, very, very simple. And therefore, you need to look at that. You need to look at your content. Those are the simplest things you can do now to be ready for the next wave of technology. And AI is going to move leaps and bounds. So in other words, if you start talking about AI in a medical field, they already, after 18 months, making discoveries that they didn't know about 10 years ago. So in other words, they could cure certain type of cancer within the next 3 years. If you think about any other technology, any other industries, the pace of evolution has accelerated significantly with AI. And therefore, there are companies these days that are connecting and allow connectivity to multiple new tools. And you have other platforms that prevent those new tools to connect because they want to keep their own closed environment. I will be changing my PMS today to a PMS that allows open API and that is actively seeking to connect any app across the world, because those any app could be the next super app that you wish you'd be able to connect to, but your property management system or your channel manager doesn't allow you to. And so that's really thinking about that.
Yeah, and I was going to say, from a RoomPriceGenie perspective, this is the reason why we also went down the lines of open API as well, to make sure that from a revenue management perspective, that it's widely accessible to the masses.
Yeah.
Look, conscious of time, I think just to sort of wrap up key takeaways, obviously think about your content from a visibility perspective. If you haven't already picked up, Matt is very passionate about the likes of Google and Gemini and where they're going. And I think keeping an eye on what their advancements look like will allow you to keep abreast of how quickly the space is changing going forward. And then obviously looking at your tech stack overall. Matt, there are a few questions in the chat. So we've got sort of 3 or 4 minutes, so we'll quickly go through. There is a question here from Kelly, who would like to know what self-check-ins look like and how do guests feel about self-check-ins?
Luxury is choice. Different consumers want to be pampered, others just want to check in a hotel like they will do on a flight. They don't want to talk to anybody, they just want to get to the room. And, so therefore that guest technology, being able to open your door with your mobile phone, and not having to talk. I mean, for me, sometimes I go to a luxury hotel and they sit me down for 15 minutes explaining all the facilities. I couldn't think of anything worse to do in my life is to sitting down and learning about a hotel that I've already researched and that I know intrinsically because I booked it and I done the research before. So I think you need to have, and I think if I were to give an example, Reggie's Melbourne has done that, which is a hosted lobby, where essentially you could self-check-in if you wanted to, you could go to your door if you wanted to, but you've got somebody here there with a tablet that could sort of help you. Zedwell does that as well in London. So I think is from a guest experience is not forcing your guest experience on people, is having a guest experience that allows people to choose what they want to do.
Understand. There's a couple of other questions which I feel like we've covered off, but just quickly, one from Gary, looking at probably the last 10 years really, with Booking.com dominating the travel platform space. Over the next couple of years, do you think that Booking will still continue to dominate that space? I think the answer to that is yes when it comes to the actual booking, but not necessarily from a search funnel perspective. Fair?
No, correct. But I think they're paying enough. The lack of Google and ChatGPT see the opportunity to monetize ads. And travel ads are the most profitable for Google. The biggest clients of Google across all industries is Booking.com and Expedia. And what you see Booking.com and Expedia buying all their competitors. So Hotels.com is owned by Expedia. Agoda is owned by Booking.com. Booking.com owns Kayak as well, which is a meta search. Trivago is owned by Expedia. So they essentially keep those brands alive, but they essentially what you have is you've got 3 or 4 brands that own the whole ecosystem when it comes to online travel agents and meta search, and they're the one that generate a lot of income for the search engines. So if you were Google or ChatGPT, will you alienate those big clients that are willing to pay billions of dollars every year into your coffins? No, you will just arrange your search funnel to allow them to strive into your ecosystem, and I think this is what's going to happen. There will be a few new players that are going to rise. We don't know who they are, how, etc. They're going to rise, but I think they're going to rise more through a B2B sort of setup. In other words, the likes of Nuité, the likes of Hopper that have started to power the booking platform of bank rewards or airlines or fintech companies as well. So it's more about reaching the users in closed user group channels.
I think, conscious time, we're at time. There's one additional question from Daniel, which is quite interesting. So for those that want to stay on, I think interesting to get Matt's take on this. The question from Daniel is non-traditional channels, so thinking about bed banks, loyalty apps, super apps, of the like, that are starting to integrate into travel offerings. I guess how do you think that they'll fit into the distribution landscape and affect the way in which travelers book in the future from a closed user group perspective?
Well, they are the loyalty program. So I'm a customer of Commonwealth Bank of Australia, okay, CBA in Australia. Hopper, which is the largest travel app in the US, is essentially powering the platform. Essentially, I can take my reward points and I can pay for travel directly on Hopper. And they recently signed Virgin Australia, the Velocity program, which is essentially a frequent flyer program for Virgin Australia. And they provide the accommodation booking technology for that. You've got other players like Nuité that some people never heard of, but they're really big into the fintech space where you've got the likes of Revoluts and credit cards, etc. They will be using Nuité to actually make their travel. Or allow the customer to book travel. So when it comes to the loyalty apps, when it comes to the banks, etc., you already got players that have started to play in that funnel, including Expedia, including Booking.com, their B2B network. So we think of Booking.com as a B2C platform, but they've got an Expedia, but most of their bookings are coming via the B2B part of it, which essentially they're providing inventory to multiple distributors or to multiple airlines or to multiple travel management company on a B2B OPEC setup. And so this is already ultimately happening, but the one winning the games are the big ones at the moment because they've got more clouds and they are able to offer better commissions.
Cool. Look, thank you so much for your insights there. We're at the last question, and we're also over time, so I think we'll end there. For anyone that would like to reach out to us, you're absolutely welcome to do so. And of course, this recording we will be posting on social channels at the end as well. There's a couple of prompts on the screens there for those that do that might want to learn more about us. Matt, thank you so much again. Really appreciate your time jumping on and for sharing your amazing thoughts. Let's see where the future takes us.
Yeah, definitely. I think if I wanted to say there's a few questions as well that remain unanswered in the chat, just connect with me on LinkedIn and just send me a note and I can basically just answer any of your questions. A big one, I suppose, is that invest in technology and invest in marketing if you want to win into that AI game, because it's all about marketing and it's all about having the right technology to convert bookers as well, lookers into bookers.
And that all comes back to that hyper-personalization part that you spoke about. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. Wishing you all a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.